All right. Official good morning, everybody. I am Sarah Werelberg. I'm the director of the Stanford Web Services team, past host of Stanford Drupal Camp, then Stanford Web Camp, and current cheerer honor from the sidelines for the organizers who do such a good job in putting this together and attracting a variety of guests and speakers from all over the globe, including our current speaker, Emma. Emma is, as you can see on the title slide there, the UX manager for the University of Edinburgh, which is a place that I once got to visit and is outstandingly beautiful location. So I'm pretty gosh darn jealous. Although Stanford's not bad, so if you ever have a chance to visit, Emma will show you around. Emma is also the UX research lead for Drupal's newest low-code product, Drupal CMS, which I think is just fantastic that she's joining us today to talk about something that's not just a Drupal-specific topic, but is also bringing a lot of extra experience to the table as a product lead for the open source application that we use so much here at Stanford. So I will turn it over to Emma to introduce herself a little bit more and her topic.
Thank you, and thank you everybody for having me this year. So yes, I have a talk in which I'm going to share some about the information the work that we've been doing at the University of Edinburgh on staff and academic profiles, looking at how these can better represent the work and interests of the people who work for us. Let me see, advance my slide on. Whoops, a bit too soon. So here's an outline of what I'm going to cover today. So I'll start with some background and introduction, introduce myself and provide some information about the University of Edinburgh and talk about our online profiles at Edinburgh and why they're problematic. And then I'll talk about how we addressed this problem and break it down into the research activities myself and my team undertook, what we learned, and yeah, how we use this information to move us into a solution space with recommendations and how we kind of iterated and co-designed towards the development of an MVP. I'll finish up by talking about what we're planning next in terms of opening out for collaborations and then have some time for some questions. This talk is covering about 6 months of work, so it's going to be light on some of the details, but at the end, I'll share a link to my slides and series of blog posts that accompany it if you're interested to learn a bit more. All right, thank you for the introduction. I'm Emma Horrell, and as Sarah said, I head up the UX service at the University of Edinburgh. The remit of my team at Edinburgh is to improve digital experiences for basically anybody who interacts with or uses the university. And we do this, me and my small team, really through a combination of UX research and also content design. I like to work with people who face the same challenges and opportunities as me. So in the higher education space, I run a community of practice and yeah, some of you may know me from Drupal. I'm UX research lead for Drupal CMS, UX manager for Core, and I also advise on the AI initiative. And this year, I'm very excited to be running the Drupal Higher Ed Summit in Rotterdam, which is a first for DrupalCon Europe. So yeah, very excited for that later in the year. All right, so the University of Edinburgh, this is where I work, and we are a old traditional university in the best possible way. We are one of 24 so-called Russell Group universities in the UK, which is a kind of prestigious badge that we're proud of. And we're known, if you Google the University of Edinburgh, you'll probably find pictures like this one. This is beautiful old college. And we also have more modern institutes such as the Edinburgh Futures Institute and the Bayes Centre. And we are a large university. So we have approximately 50,000 students, 13,000 staff. And on the digital side of things, I guess we mirror our size because our web estate is nearly 65,000 pages across hundreds of individual sites. So this is a talk about staff profiles. So I wanted to establish what I mean when I'm talking about staff profiles at Edinburgh. Essentially, formatted web pages featuring individuals at the university. So The people who own profiles include our academic staff, but also non-academic staff as well. So we refer to them as professional services staff. People that also can have a profile are our postgraduate students. So, for example, those doing a master's or a PhD. And to talk about the technology behind these profiles, so the ones that currently exist on our web estate were built on Drupal 7, which was built through a centrally managed site. And the profiles exist in a root level site. So it's a huge site. It contains, at the last count, something like 7,400 profiles. And this profile site sits alongside 160 other also centrally managed sites in our web estate. And aside from that, we have other sites within our web estate. Some are on Drupal and some are not. So it's a bit of a mixed bag. We use Google Analytics as a tool to study how our web pages are interacted with. And it's always interesting to look at this account and to probe it to see how profiles are used. And what the Google Analytics data regularly tells us is that our profiles are well used by our audiences. So people come to us and they want to look for who works for the university. We can see names of people whose profiles are most interacted with, and we can track this over time as well in response to trends. So, for example, if one of our academics makes the news about a research finding, then we'll see spikes in the number of searches for those people. And a high proportion, approximately 60% of the searches on our web estate are for our people. So this is to establish really that profiles are important on our web estate in terms of showcasing what our people do. Excuse me, I'm just gonna have a quick drink. So that said, what are the problems with our profiles? Well, a major factor, some of you may have twigged when I introduced this, was that they're built on Drupal 7. And if you know Drupal, you'll know that Drupal 7 has already reached end of life. So this is kind of a ticking time bomb of a site of over 7,000 profiles that either needs to migrate or move to an upgraded platform. We did complete a migration of the rest of the sites, nearly all of the sites in our estate before the end of life deadlines, but profile still remains. And that's largely because we know that the current provision is not ideal. We don't want to migrate the profiles in the state they're in. So we did an initial spot check of what's in those 7,000 pages. We found that many of them are out of date. Many of them belong to people who've left. In some cases, there's duplication, so we find more than one profile for the same person. There are some people on the other side, there are some people who work for us that don't have profiles. Some of the profiles don't have much content in them, and so on. So before heading into a straight migration scenario, we decided to take a pause and to do some research and work out how can we do a better job with our profiles? How can we improve the profile provision? And the way that we approached this from the UX perspective was thinking about, well, let's have a look at the existing way of doing things and let's find out what's wrong with that. And with that information, we can use that to do a better job. So we initiated a research program that aimed to learn about what we call the current state in really three different ways. First of all, by doing a site analysis, having a look at what's there and gathering data from the site itself. We also wanted to reach out to the people who own profiles, and we chose to do that by doing a survey, first of all, but also by interviewing staff, by actually hearing what they had to say through one-on-one interviews. With that information, then kind of moving into the solution side of things, we aim to define a future state for profiles by a combination of looking to competitor universities for inspiration, but also running ideation workshops with the staff who produce profile content and also manage profile content across our web estate, and by forming kind of co-design squads of interested people to work together on this to see how we could do a better job. And I'm going to talk about each of these elements in turn. So I'll first of all start off with what we learned from the different pieces of research and then talk about the co-design side. So one of the first pieces of research we undertook was the site analysis, and this was all about having a deep dive into the profile site to get an idea of what was there. So on this slide, you can see two things. So on one side, you can see a table that's showing the different fields that people were using in their profiles. So this relates to the fields in the profile's content type. We looked and saw which ones were populated. And there's a couple of things interesting from this piece of work. The first is that biography, which you would imagine would be common across all profiles, it's one of the most commonly used fields across all profiles in the site, but it's also only used by around 50%. So that suggests that there's a lot of profiles that don't even have a basic biography information populated. Also, the content type had two custom fields, as well as the predefined fields. It had two custom fields, which we call publisher defined one and publisher defined two. These are at the bottom of the table there. And these were actually used as frequently as some of the pre-labeled fields. And so the inference from this was that those pre-labeled fields are maybe not working for people. They're not choosing to put their content in there. So also from the site analysis work, we did some unpicking of typical individual profiles to really have a look at the content. And there were some interesting findings in terms of variability. So there were common elements across the different profiles, but they were all very variable. So for example, when we looked at images, they didn't follow a set format. We thought that every profile would have an image of the person, but some had chosen to include an image of, for example, their research. So it could be an electron microscope image or something like that. Job titles, again, we thought, well, we can predict what those will be because they will be populated through our directory of staff. But actually, some people have multiple job titles. Some were kind of honorary based. So, for example, a Chancellor's Fellow, as well as being a lecturer in a particular subject. There was a commonality for people to have written descriptive content about pieces of work. And reading some of those, you could see why they hadn't fitted into those predefined fields. There was also a commonality of content from other sources. So they were pulling and linking to other sources of content. So continuing the site analysis, we looked at who had published the profiles, and specifically we looked at the details of the staff that have published profiles and the PhD students actually against what we call the population figures of the university. So that gave us an indication of representation because we wanted to understand which staff members are making more use of profiles and who's not using them. And what this showed us, perhaps unsurprisingly, was that there were more academic profiles than there are profiles for professional services staff. And breaking this down into the different faculties, what we found was the arts and humanities faculty and the medicine and vet faculty, those staff members were making more proportionate use of profiles than science and engineering. And a really stark finding from this analysis was that of the some 7,000 profiles on the site, nearly 20%, so nearly a fifth, belonged to staff who'd left the university. And of the profiles that were active, 40% belonged to PhD students. So they were going to be with us for a sort of a defined period of time before they also would go out of date. So the data from the site analysis only told us some of the story about what was problematic. So we had some assumptions, but we needed to really hear from staff before we could sort of validate those. And so our starting point for this was running a survey that we sent out to all staff. And this contained very few questions, really. It asked staff, did they have a profile? And did they have a profile elsewhere? And we asked them, did they want to tell us anything else about their use of profiles? So we had a kind of free text box open to comments. The results were interesting. So the split was slightly skewed to professional services staff owing to the number of respondents and perhaps who we circulated it to. We didn't reach as many academics, perhaps, as professional services staff. But of the respondents, it was interesting that 11% of people who replied to the survey said they didn't even know if they had a profile. And it was also interesting that 65% said they had a profile elsewhere. Picking out on some of the themes from the free text comments, we learned that staff had found profiles difficult. They were saying that they were difficult to set up and update. They'd also concerns about how searchable the content was in them, so whether they would be returned in search results. A small handful had privacy concerns about putting their data out on profiles, and there were mixed messages in terms of what people wanted from profiles. So some people had replied in the comments pushing for sort of uniformity across profiles, and others were pushing for customizability. So this was interesting, but going deeper into the research, the surveys only revealed some of the stories, so we knew we needed to hear from staff themselves. So we used the survey as a way to recruit staff to be interviewed. So 88 of the people who replied to the survey said they would be happy to be interviewed. We reached out to 70 and we threw the net wider looking for equal representation from a range of staff. And so we interviewed 40 altogether. And we did one-on-one interviews, covering some of the themes that had come up from the survey, but also kind of giving them free rein to talk about what they wanted to with regards to profiles. So the first theme that came out of the interviews was that staff thought they were important. Both academics and professional services staff liked their profiles and regarded them as important because they were a way of finding people. So they could be found, but also they could use profiles to find other staff members. So it was almost like a contact card or a job description. In some cases, staff had said this was useful, but it wasn't useful for them to be found as individuals because actually the way they worked was that it was better for people to contact them as a team. So in some cases, staff had said, I've got a profile, I don't really need it because if people are looking to find me, I would direct them to my generic team email. We spent some time analysing the results of the interviews and unearthed the kind of interplay between staff and the staff roles. And we found there were kind of three sets of wants or needs from profiles. So the people who owned a profile had particular needs. They almost wanted an individual CV-like page to portray what they did. And other people that they worked with wanted ways of grouping profiles together by theme or within the faculty. And for those searching profiles, they almost wanted a way to digest multiple profiles to find what they were looking for. 13% of the staff in the survey said they didn't use profiles on the university website, which was interesting to sort of understand why people didn't use profiles. So we asked people why in the interviews, and what came out was that first of all, they wanted a flexible profile type to accommodate what they said about themselves and their work, and they chose to do that elsewhere. So for some, it boiled down, for others, sorry, they didn't use profiles because they found them difficult to use. They couldn't remember how to log in. And interestingly, professional services staff fed back that when they looked at the profiles, they weren't sure how to put their content in. And that's why they didn't use them, because the fields that were there didn't really appeal to what they wanted to say. We asked staff about alternative sources of profiles. So personal websites came up, as did research repositories and also social media channels as places where people wanted to talk about themselves. And we also looked we asked them about their thoughts about other competitor university websites, particularly Russell Group university websites like ours. And this led us on a path to sort of do some competitor analysis. And two main trends emerged, comparing the way that other universities did front-end styling of profiles compared to us. We found that ours were more closed. Other universities had taken a more open approach without the accordions to have to find content. There was also a second trend towards more descriptive content because academics especially, were moving away from the traditional categories of research and publications and instead wanting to describe things like community initiatives, media engagement, and so on. The interviews give us an opportunity to delve into how profiles are kind of made and managed. And we teased out a profile life cycle from that. So we learned that profiles are created, then they're updated. And then we thought right the way through to if a staff member leaves, the profile should be deleted. And what we found hearing from interviews is that people at the beginning part of the profile life cycle was well supported. In some cases, people were having profiles made for them and they didn't realize, but very few could relate to a time when they thought their profile would be deleted, or if they needed to update it, they might have not updated it because they weren't sure of how to do it. And in some cases, they didn't even know they had one to update. The interviews also gave us some interesting, it gave us kind of shone the light on some interesting pieces of research that have been done relating to profiles. One of these related to what makes a really good profile. So this project had actually been done by a staff member we interviewed, and they'd sought to understand what PhD students looked for in a profile. They interviewed 19 prospective PhD students, and this uncovered what those students were looking for. So things like choice of image, inclusion of video to make a person be more personable, detail of outside interests, instructions how to apply for a PhD, all fed into making a really good profile. So this was an interesting learning point about how to make them better. Another interesting piece of work related to the use of AI. I know this is not really anything new in this day and age. When we did this research, in fact, this project was from 2023, so it was quite new at the time. And this related to, this was a student project, in fact, and they built an AI agent that had a job of extracting staff information from a database, and another agent that paired the output of the first one with information extracted from Google Scholar to create a profile, a biographical profile for a staff member. And what the project sought to understand was how good a job it did in that process. And the way that they assessed the job that it did was by looking at several points just to check that they were correct. So was the image correct? Was the LinkedIn link correct? Was the research themes correct? And so on. And they got staff members to look at the content of the AI generated profiles to assess if it was actually correct. And what this study found was the outputs were 78% accurate. I'm sure that the AI will do a much better job now, but some of the errors were things like blending information from multiple people with the same name. Also, the LLM didn't do a terrific job on voice and tone. It especially needed help with pronouns. If it was desirable to write in the third person rather than the first person, it needed to be told when to say she, her, or they, them, or he and him. And it also had made mistakes with research themes which weren't fully defined. So a lot came out of those three pieces of research, the site analysis, the survey, and the interviews. And myself and my team boiled all of this down to sort of three categories of recommendations. And the first was relating to profile design. So taking inspiration from competitors and thinking about how to make our people's content really shine out, we decided, first of all, let's remove the accordions and let's include minimal pre-labeled fields to allow people to be able to describe their work and activities in a less pigeonholed way. We wanted to include a provision for tags and taxonomies because we knew it was still a need for people to group multiple profiles and to look across profiles. So that was an important sort of sorting mechanism. And these should also be contextual, and therefore we agreed that they should be contained. They would be agreed at a faculty level, so we wouldn't aim to have one set of taxonomies that would apply across the entire university. On the technical side of things, the recommendation was related where the profiles would sit in the web estate. So we wanted to avoid having a big bucket of profiles and instead associate profiles with faculty or corporate websites, perhaps in an about section or our people section, so that the person in question belonged to that unit of the university. And acknowledging that much of the content lived in other repositories and people who own profiles wanted to pull that in, a key part of our solution is a middleware solution, the middleware layer, pulling from those sources and then pushing through a presentation layer. And I'm going to talk about this a bit later on. And the final aspect of the technical recommendations was to have an opt-in rather than opt-out. So avoid profiles being created by default and then abandoned, because that's something we'd seen. And the last bunch of recommendations really related to content design. So it was acknowledging that no matter how good the tech is, people still need to write about themselves and to tell, the world what they're doing. So my team, with its content design strength, are rolling out a piece of work to map out use cases and scenarios, taking inspiration from the one that research project addressed about attracting prospective PhD students. So mapping out how we can support profile owners to write their content appropriately. We've done one workshop like this, and we have more planned, and hoping to bring AI tools. In fact, I talked about this, I think at last year's camp, about our AI tools to support content design, thinking about how we can support profile owners to use those to help them write really good profiles. So recommendations are great, but if they're only worth something if you can make them happen. And this is where the sort of co-design part comes in. So first of all, what do I mean by co-design? Well, you may have encountered it before, and it's an approach really characterized by 6 mindsets. And these were mapped out in a book called Beyond Sticky Notes by K.M. Bakercher, which I highly recommend. So they involve hospitality, curiosity, elevating lived experience, being in the grey, valuing many perspectives, and learning through doing. And this was a good approach. As I said at the start, we have kind of limited resource within my immediate team, but there is a lot of expertise university-wide. We're a big institution. And we wanted to take an approach where we were building this provision kind of with the people, for the people. If we built it in an echo chamber, we could miss the mark. So we sought to embody the co-design in several ways. On the hospitality side of things, a small thing, but I ran some workshops with snacks. I had to invite people from across the university to just come and learn about our work and encourage them to share what they did regarding profiles, because it was something that really every part of the university had experience of. I then kind of drilled down and ran a couple of ideation workshops to look at the different elements, and we formed squads to move forward to an MVP. So just to kind of talk about each of those in turn. So the first ideation workshop centered around the profile life cycle. We'd mapped this out, but we wanted to know, how does this actually happen in different faculties and corporate units of the university? So we encouraged people to talk about how they created profiles, were they opt-in, opt-out, were they internal or external, did they use a fixed format or a flexible one, how did they control how people could edit the content, where did they sit in their sites, and so on. Was the content added in an automatic or a manual way, how it was updated, and how they managed deletion. So we uncovered lots of insights from that about how things happened. In the second workshop, we took the same life cycle, but we took a more technical lens to think about how the technology aided those stages. So what technology could help populate profiles, for example, with basic details. How could it work dynamically to pull content from other systems where people will be publishing their content? And how could we remove the need to manually remove profiles? Could the removal be synchronized, for example, with a staff member leaving and their account being deleted, so that it didn't lead to those out-of-date profiles? And in an ideal world, we would have had lots of resource in a project to put our ideas for improvement into practice. But what we did is encourage people to continue to work with us. So from the teams that shared how they did profiles and talked about the life cycle, we pulled together a kind of small squad of people, and we've been chipping away at this, working in an agile way off the back of those different workshops, and kind of taking apart pieces of the solution and working on those together to share ideas. And one of the main parts of the solution that we came up with was this kind of middleware solution to be able to pass information from separate repositories through a middleware layer and then to display it on one of our Drupal sites in our web estate. And some ideas we've currently gathered about this based on sort of technological expertise. There's one suggestion is a Laravel, an app built in Laravel or Python. We've also looked to the possibility of this being a Drupal site, and the Drupal site is the preferred option at present. And in terms of pulling the data from those repositories, we've looked at Drupal feeds. It might not scale to the extent that we need it to, but we're certainly exploring how well it can cope with it and how well it can deliver the content from those repositories. We've also access to a third-party product called Choreo, which is a platform that handles integrations. So we're checking out those capabilities in terms of integrations. We have started to look at MVP and AI. However, there's sensitivities around personal data, so it's kind of stopping progress in that regard at present. And I like to work in the open. So in the course of this work, I've sought ideas from other institutions, and I'm looking to continue this sort of within the Drupal community. I haven't yet set up a Slack channel, but I will be shortly, and it will be on the agenda at the next Higher Education Summit in Rotterdam in September. So we have a solution sort of planned, but we're very keen to open to ideas to kind of pull it apart and make it even better. So that's the end of my slides today. I've kind of rattled through that. So as I said, there is more detail in a series of blog posts, and you can access the slides from the QR code, but I'm happy if you'd like to ask me some questions, or if you'd like to connect on LinkedIn and contact me afterwards. Equally happy for that as well. So we have, I think, 10 minutes or so for questions.
Thank you so much, Emma. That was a wealth of information, and I love the very research-based approach that you took, and the way you presented the findings from the research and kind of the aha moments that led to the subsequent idea to do the inclusive workshops and working together across the university on what is really a shared challenge. I think that's sometimes it's interesting. We all see that the challenge is there. We all are kind of feeling it, but it's hard sometimes to get everyone to the table to say, let's try to do something
Yeah.
together, because the organizational silos or the different priorities that we have that are pulling our attention at that moment makes it hard to get into the room. So I think since I'm moderator, I get to have the first question.
Right.
The joy of volunteering. My first question that really came up was you had that great comment about this is what the users, your PhD students in particular, were looking for when looking for a supervisor, and what they
Yep.
said that would attract them in terms of the content. And you had that list of content that was missing, what they
Yep.
wanted to see that they didn't have. Is the university doing anything with that in terms of providing content creation support to faculty to add that extra
Yep.
oomph?
That really rests with my team. So we run content design training. One of the things we struggle with is like reaching academics, because, when we're trying to, I guess, we're trying to encourage them to write for web, but it's like, they're obviously specialists in their field in terms of academic writing, and they want to portray themselves in different ways. So there was a diagram that I had where we had kind of three perspectives on profiles, and what we try and do is reach the people that manage content on websites in schools or faculties, to then address those academics by proxy. So if they can show, if an academic comes to them and says, why is my profile not showing up in search results, then we target that kind of like sometimes administrative person or a digital usually digital marketeer type person. They come, they direct them to us, and then we can kind of instill the best practice to them that way. Because we're a large institution and we're a very small team, and so we are quite far removed from faculty and interacting with them on the daily. But we are starting to be more proactive about reaching them when they have capacity to listen. So currently we're kind of at the end of semester, so we it's quite a good time for us right now, going into May to reach those audiences. But yeah, it's taken me a few years to realize the route to try and like I guess access them and give them the support when they're ready to receive it, if that makes sense.
That's a great nuance. The support when they're ready to receive it, because
Yeah,
there's those tiny windows through the year where they
there
need to have
are
a second to breathe, right?
100%. Yes, I feel like I need a big poster of those windows as well because they're fleeting and you miss them and then you have to wait a whole year or a whole semester before you get the opportunity again. So, but
They're
yeah, we
there
learn
when
by
they need
doing.
to. Yeah, exactly. Well, I want to invite our other participants in the room. If you have a question for Emma, you know me, I'll just keep talking because I have 1,000, but I would love to give others the opportunity. Irina?
Emma, thanks for a wonderful presentation. I know you do a lot of work with other organizations and very active in world community. Um, I think that our keynote was um, very impressive, and I wanted to ask. The keynote brought up the points that everyone's like, yeah, yeah, we know about it, but we are not realizing. And I think the biggest question is who owns content for LLM training? Because now all the large universities that have, and they have to have these different sites because each organization adds their piece of information or wants to surface their piece of information, but at the same time, we have challenge in consistency in this information coming from Office of Registrar, department side,
Yeah,
lab, lots of things. And profiles are one of the very, high priority area because we have some profiles that are dated year 2000, and it's
yeah,
not the oldest one. Um,
yeah.
so what are your thoughts on the topic? It's not less question like how do you address it, but what are your thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, I agree. I think one thing one thing people do care about, like in my experience, people do care about profiles if if they need them to do something for them. So if they want to, for example, if you're an academic researcher and you want to like make a bid for funding, you're going to make sure your profile's up to date. Because I think the tricky part is that those moments where people pay attention to their content are not always the same, reasons that people are searching it in the first place. So you're right, you can have, and I think it happens the web over. And if we like personally in our organization, if we make it difficult for people to use, for example, our central content management system, where we have control and we can make sure it's accessible and that it's we can apply good SEO practices so that to the best of we're working within algorithms that we have no control over, especially to do with AI, but we can, instill good content practices to make sure it has the best chance of being found. But if we don't make it easy for people to use the tools, they'll publish it elsewhere. And for me, that's a bigger problem because people tend to publish it elsewhere and they forget about it. And then then it will be pulled up. It will be, feeding LLMs incorrect information. So there's two things. I think it's trying to encourage people to use essential provision and then just trying to support them to do the best job they can and to make sure that it's accurate. And wherever possible, I try and like showcase examples of what can happen. The risks of out of date content, for example, what the implications for that are. We have in the UK, we have like the Research Excellence Framework. We call it a REF, and it happens I think it's every 4 years. But there's one coming up for 2029, so it's now a good time to, I look for like external levers to try and catch people's attention to like prompt. This isn't a good time to update your content, especially with the rise of AI search and so on, and also with REF the people are going to be analyzing the content to assess for research excellence right now. So yeah, I think I don't think you expected me to come up with an answer that solves it, but yeah, there's certainly plenty of moving parts to be aware of. Great. I bet you great. Somebody's updated their profile. I love it. I feel like my work's done. I just noticed in the chat, so well done. Yeah, old CVs showing up. It's a risk as well. This is personal data. I think the more we can kind of what's the word, like make it, show that the risks are happening, then it's kind of leading people to come to their own conclusions.
Well, yeah, we have like old profiles in various research centers
Yeah,
and on various web spaces that have been deprecated a long time ago. And
we have, yeah,
we
it is a
just
risk,
keep
and
seeing it.
absolutely. I mean, for us, it part of the reason for doing this research work was to like show the problem. We will be, this 7,000 profiles, we'll have to do something with it, but we really don't want to migrate it because it's out of date. It needs an audit. It needs, perhaps we will go to like encourage people to recreate their profiles, like delete by default, and then encourage it. That might be a way to do it rather than run the risk of, because I think when things are changing so much, and I would like to see a move towards more mindful creation of content rather, now that you don't know where it's going to be used and how it can turn up. I think we would like to see more thought applied to that. Um, to find the outdated documents, so we've used well, there are various developments within Drupal right now, actually, that are kind of AI powered tools to help assess content on websites and assess what's out of date or what needs to be updated or what's irrelevant. I think anybody who's experimented with AI, this isn't a new thing, but the results you get from that kind of, when you try and use that tool as an efficiency saver, it's obviously doing a content audit is going to surface your outdated documents, but that traditionally is taking quite a lot of time. AI tools can help with that, but you need to go through the hard work of telling an AI what's good and what's bad. So if you want it, use an AI, like for example, the AI content review module that I'm working on with people just now in Drupal. We're going through a lot of work to think how you give the AI the right context so that it can then make decisions of keep that, don't keep that, flag this, don't flag that. So it's a tool, but it still requires that, people making decisions at a strategy level of what to stay and go. And that can be really difficult within higher education, especially, if academics have kind of published something and maybe moved on and there isn't succession planning and so on. So it then becomes a governance problem, which is always harder to solve. I don't know if that answers the question. These are great questions, by the way. I love talking about this kind of thing.
It definitely feels like there could be a subgroup at the, cross universities level tackling the question
Yeah,
of profiles, content governance, and what should stay with the university and what should stay with the individual. Because I think
yeah,
that's part of it too. You had that really good slide about the different owners of content and how they have their goals maybe are at cross purposes.
yeah,
And when the person leaves the university, their content goes with them. That's their body of work. So the question becomes, what does the university retain and accept the ongoing risk for maintaining that in an accurate way and abiding by privacy rules? And there's so many privacy rules now globally that I wonder if the scope for what the university will want to retain will get narrower and narrower. over
I
time?
think it will. I think definitely it was something that came up in the research about, are we obliged to keep this information? In the UK, we have like data retention rules, and we're quite strict on how long you can keep people's personal data for, and, with their consent and so on. And we aren't really obliged to keep a profile for, as a record of employment, because that was one question as to whether they needed to, we needed to hold on to them for that. But on the front facing website, that's certainly in the UK, that wasn't a requirement. It wouldn't be required for a human resource record. And so then, yeah, going back to the earlier point, it becomes a piece of outdated content that could be risky. There's always an aversity to deletion of content, certainly in our university. So one thing we have found is not quite deletion, but does the same job is moving to the web archive or the Wayback Machine. So we have started to investigate mechanisms whereby people can do that. So it's not the same as pressing delete, which seems people are averse to doing that because I guess it relates to sunk cost fallacy. If you've put effort into something, you don't want to remove it. But there's then a place for it, but it's not within the university web estate. And I don't know how effectively AI can crawl the Wayback Machine. So I don't know if then that content, that same risk of it pulling it up in answer to search queries is the same. Not really looked into that, but it'd be interesting to find out.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's a amazing resource, the Internet Archive, and making sure that our websites are archivable so that you can, with confidence, tell that content owner that their content is stored safely, just not in its former home. Although I did have a pretty funny story recently of our CIO having had a conversation with someone where they asked him if he could prevent something from going into the Internet Archive, which is, of course, is not operated by Stanford. So it was a real head scratcher of a question.
No, that is what, yeah. Gosh, okay. No, I haven't encountered anything like that, but I guess, yeah, interesting.
That's why has his job and we don't, right?
Yes,
Well, we're at time. We're a little bit over, but I really appreciate the incredible questions. I just have one more question, and it's an important one.
go
When
for it.
you attracted people to your in-person workshops, you did so with snacks. What was
Yes.
the snack that got them there?
Well, we have limited ranges of snacks available, but I ordered we have different tiers of catering that are available at the university. So I had to like work within those limits, but then I brought in depending on so one of them was over Easter time. So we have like Cadbury cream eggs, mini eggs, they're always a crowd pleaser. And I think we had one so in the UK, we basically go from, Valentine's to Easter to summer is a bit of a like non-candy season, but then Christmas quickly rolls around in September. So there's always some seasonal chocolates or something to bring people in. And yeah, just people really enjoyed meeting. We're such a large organization. People like valued the opportunity to sit in a room with people that, like sharing ideas around this in a quite an informal way. And yeah, it worked better than I'd hoped. It was, one of those things you try and cross your fingers. But yeah, it formed some good relationships actually. And people leave having met people that are sharing problems. So it's a little bit of therapy. Yes.
Yes,
Um,
we're all thinking about food. Well,
yeah, sorry.
I thank you for the tips. Candy is definitely the way to get us there. If you ever want any international participants in your next design session, I think you can count us all in. Just
Certainly
give me a
do.
heads up so we can cross the pond. But thank you so
Definitely.
much, Emma. We really appreciate you joining us. And thanks everybody for joining the call.
Thank you.
See you next time.
Thank you. Bye.